Welcome all hunters, anglers, trappers, and shooters to the only fish and wildlife conservation podcast that goes behind the scenes of the business of conservation, the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Our podcast is hosted by John Gassett from the Wildlife Management Institute and Jim Curcuruto of the Outdoor Stewards of Conservation Foundation. John and Jim will talk with experts from all sectors of the conservation arena about their passion for conserving the great outdoors. So please welcome our hosts of the Connecting with Conservation podcast, John and Jim.
Hello again, and welcome to another episode of Connecting with Conservation, the only podcast that goes behind the scenes to look at the business of conservation and how things are done in our country. I'm John Gassett with the Wildlife Management Institute and your co-host with Connecting with Conservation. Here this morning with Jim Curcuruto from Outdoor Stewards of Conservation. How you doing today, Jim?
Good. I'm glad we're virtual because I know you're down a little bit with potentially the flu. So you keep it over there in Kentucky while Julie and I stay far away from you virtually. But yeah, hope that goes quick for you. And yeah, I'm excited about kicking off the year here with a great guest and Connected with Conservation podcast. We tell all different types of stories. And you just really realize how complex managing land, fish, and wildlife is. It just doesn't take care of itself when we've got 350 million people, pushing 350 million people in America. So our guest today, Julie Thorstenson of the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society, who's got some great stories. So welcome, Julie. Hope I didn't butcher your last name, and neglected to mention you're the executive director of Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. So welcome, and why don't you give us a little background on yourself, and then we'll get into some stories.
Sure. Hihani Lakshe, Julie Thorstenson, Machiapi, Woksapi Kiglu Hamniwe, Lakota Machiapi. Ma Lakota Wakpawashte Mataha. Good morning. My name is Julie Thorstenson. My Lakota name is Woksapi Kiglu Hamniwe, and I am Lakota, a citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux Nation, which is where I'm joining you from today. And as you mentioned, I'm the executive director for the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society. I've grown up here on the Cheyenne River Sioux Reservation and Sioux Nation here, and pretty much had my entire career here. I started in 2000 working for the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe Game Fish and Parks Department as a wildlife habitat biologist, and my focus was really on restoration, habitat restoration from the impacts of the Pixeln project to the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe and other tribes in South Dakota. So I did a lot of stuff on cotton restoration, riparian restoration, and just trying to restore some of that prime habitat that was lost. So from there, I got my master's while I was working for the tribe. From there, I went to work for a small Catholic college that had a outpost here on Cheyenne River, and it was mainly in healthcare. So it kind of flipped me into a different place, but really learned a lot about nonprofit work and mission work. And at that time, I also got my PhD. All of my degrees from South Dakota State University, go Jacks, and my PhD allowed me to focus on integrating culture into ethics education for scientists and engineers. And I had the privilege of working with several tribal colleges in South Dakota and some private colleges, universities, and a university in Bolivia. So it really gave me some background in qualitative research, which I didn't think I would ever use. And then here I am using qualitative research a lot. But I also worked in the healthcare industry for a while for the Indian Health Service, and then also with my tribe as the tribal health CEO. So that's a very long, eclectic background, which led me to this position in May of 2019. Personal note, I'm one of 5 kids. We grew up on a cow-calf operation. My folks still live here, and I'm a mother and have three children, almost grown. And my husband and I have been back home for 25 plus years. So it's been a great opportunity, and I'm very fortunate to have been able to work and serve the people here, and now in this more of a national role for the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society.
That's great. I mean, we've had on a lot of guests from the industry, from companies, Rugers and Smith and Wessons, that tell their stories, and then of course state agencies and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But it seems there's a big connection between what you guys are doing on tribal lands and partnerships with states and Fish and Wildlife. Do you have an example of a project that you recently worked on, or one that stands out, conservation project that you want to
Oh
talk
man,
about?
I mean, there's so many. I think that's one of the kind of the missed opportunities is just, and maybe people don't hear a lot about what's going on in Indian country as far as tribal fish and wildlife conservation. But let me tell you, there's all kinds of stuff going on. And I get asked a lot, like, what are tribes working on? And I always tell people, just name something and we're working on it. I mean, everything from invasive species removal to drones to climate adaptation to big game migration, feral horse work, restoration, beaver relocation. I mean, pretty much everything. And that's really one of the highlights of my job, is just being able to visit tribes and see what they're doing on the ground. And really, I'm just completely in awe all the time of the work that's going on. Man, I mean, I hate to like pick a favorite project, but most recently I had the privilege of accompanying the Seminole tribe in Florida to do some fyke netting, where they are exploring the invasive species in the Everglades, and seeing my first siren. I thought it was a snake. I didn't really know what that was, but yeah, there's a lot of tribes that are still, because of the funding issues and the capacity issues, we still have tribes that are working at baseline data collection, and that's kind of neat. And then seeing tribes that have like these huge longitudinal data sets that they've been tracking some a species on their lands for 30-40 years. So yeah, it kind of runs a gamut. And as tribes get newly federally recognized, then we have tribes that are also at that stage where they're just starting, and so their questions are more like hunting and fishing codes, and what does a tribal fish and wildlife department look like, or what does some job descriptions, or things like that. So yeah, this job, no day is the same. That's one of the beauties of it.
So Julie, tell us a little bit about, our listeners a little bit about what the Native Fish and Wildlife Association or Society does. Native American Fish and Wildlife Society does. It's not quite the analog of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but it sort of does some of those functions. Probably sort of some of the functions that state agencies do too, and probably some like what the Wildlife Society or the American Fisheries Society does. So sort of a hybrid approach.
Yeah, I mean, just a little on our background. In the 80s, there were several big cases in tribal fish and wildlife that were kind of reaffirming tribes' authorities to govern themselves and the lands and the resources. Mescalero Apache versus New Mexico, White Mountain Apache versus Arizona, and then also the Bolt decision in the Pacific Northwest. So at this time, there was also a threat to the fish hatchery funding that several tribes were receiving. So tribal fish and wildlife professionals started to find themselves in kind of these same rooms and these same meetings. And really, like, I love our story because it was a group of tribal fish and wildlife professionals. I mean, the story I've heard was like they sat down with a napkin and started writing down like, what would this look like? But really just identifying that they needed a place where tribal fish and wildlife professionals could meet and network and bring issues to a national level with a unified voice. And so that's how we were formed in the 80s, right around that time. And our mission is to assist Native American and Alaska Native tribes with the conservation, preservation, and enhancement of their fish and wildlife resources. So we're kind of here to help connect tribes to the resources. We're definitely not, we're not doing the work for them. We're not speaking on their behalf, but we're more of, someone calls and says, hey, do you know someone working on, bears, or do you know someone working on migration? And like, that's what we've been doing. More recently, we've really been focusing on trying to remove access barriers to funding, because tribes are excluded from Pittman Robertson Dingell Johnson funds, which are, of course, the excise taxes that fund a large portion of state fish and wildlife activities. And, we still pay those taxes. Our lands, our populations are still used in those distribution formulas, but we don't see those dollars back. So the funding has always been an issue, and it's always been, inequitable and limited. And that leads to all kinds of other issues as far as, capacity. So we really want to take some of that, legwork out, I guess, and like connect. So I always tell people that we're like the largest and I would say the most efficient liaison for tribes for fish and wildlife resources. So we're trying to connect them to the people and the resources and also to each other, trying to give space where they can work together, because there's some things that, that in Indian country that you have to kind of work in Indian country to truly understand. And so just bringing people that are working in that same space together is always pretty powerful.
Yeah, well, thanks for that background, Julie. And as you and John know, managing wildlife is not easy, right? And sometimes it's, you get a lot of pushback from things because you have to save one or to help one species, you might have to hurt another or manage another. And I think an example I saw recently, and in the news, but then I think in Oregon is it the Hoopa Valley tribe protecting the northern spotted owls, but by protecting them, you have to kind of manage the barred owls that have kind of taken over a lot of their habitat. Is that something you guys are working on as well, or is that one of the projects?
Yeah, that's
there?
the Hoopa tribe in California, and I mean we're here as a resource for them if they need help connecting with someone. They are very capable and competent at what they've been doing. They have a lot of great work going on there, and Mark Higley's been there for quite a while, and he's been doing a lot of stuff. But yeah, it's kind of the understanding too, and there's such a lack of understanding of tribes' authorities and jurisdiction and how they are sovereign nations and how that all plays out. And so we get a lot of kind of questions about that. And so that's one of the things that we try to educate on is tribes being sovereign nations and their ability to govern, and that there's not just this one answer for all 574 federally recognized tribes. Like they're all individual, unique entities, and they all have slightly different priorities and things. And I would say most tribes have a philosophy of we're all related. Or in Lakota, it's Mitaki Owasi, which means like all my relatives. And so there's really kind of an openness and a place for everything. But with the Hoopa, like the northern spotted owl is important to them culturally. So there becomes kind of that push, I guess, and pull where you have to weigh protecting something that is native and culturally significant, important to your tribe, and dealing with invasives. But honestly, I would say invasives is something we all share, not just in Indian country, but it's definitely something. I always tell people it's really hard to find like kind of one thing that all tribes can really focus in on, or you can say all tribes are dealing with. But I would say funding is one, invasive species, and then climate, I would say, is the other ones that we hear pretty, I would say pretty confidently that those are the top three that most tribes are dealing with at their fish and wildlife.
Yeah, well, one of the things I like about y'all's approach to these topics are, Native Americans, throughout history and even prior to history, modern history, think about things in a very holistic manner. So things like climate change and invasive species are all, system type issues that you got to deal with, and where, not saying one's right versus another one, but, more modern approaches are usually, identifying spot fires and trying to put those out versus looking at the big picture. So I think that's a really a big strength y'all bring to the table.
Yeah. And I would say, like on the invasive species, like we're definitely, as an organization, we're not going in and just being like, every non-native species is bad, because some tribes have adapted. I mean, I would say that's one of the strengths of tribes, is being able to adapt and being resilient, but some have already adapted and they're using the non-native species. And so they're not necessarily, categorizing it as invasive. It's something that they're utilizing either medicinally or through food or whatever. So we really try to come in and amplify the voices and try to provide resources, but not come in with like this perceived like notion of like, this is what you have to do. Like every non-native species has to go, like you have to eradicate. And, we kind of want to take our cue from the tribes and then try to help them where they're at and see what their needs are and try to find those resources that can help them be successful with what they want to do. Like they're driving the bus. We're just here to help out where we can.
Yeah. I think Leopold called it intelligent tinkering. It's. I mean, think about it. We have functional equivalents in a lot of cases. The red wolf in coastal North Carolina, well, the coyotes there, and they have trouble. They spend a ton of money on trying to recover the red wolf, and the coyote's the functional equivalent there, and it's genetically swamping the red wolf. We brought elk to East Kentucky. There aren't eastern elk because those were extirpated. So we've got Rocky Mountain elk, but they're the functional equivalent of an eastern elk. So I think that intelligent tinkering is a thing that a lot of people miss, that it's okay sometimes to have a species that didn't evolve in that particular location, as long as it doesn't get out of hand, provide some benefit, provide some ecological benefit or whatever. So, yeah, I think that's a great approach.
And talking about, John, you mentioned reintroducing. I saw another story about, I think it's the Wind River Indian Plantation, where they're reintroducing beavers to the watershed there to help improve water quality and get some pools and stuff like that. Are you familiar with that project as well?
So I'm not familiar exactly with the Wind River Indian Reservations project, but we're seeing a lot of beaver relocation, beaver reintroduction, like to manage watersheds. We're seeing a lot of that throughout Indian country, but we're also seeing tribes trying to remove beaver because of other impacts. So I had a friend and colleague one time ask me, what do tribes think about wolves? And I'm like, well, which tribe? Like, it's not something, like, we don't all think the same, believe it or not. And, I said, I gave some examples and of some, different viewpoints. And I said, well, what does your organization think about wolves? Oh, we're pro-wolf. And I'm like, yeah, that's the difference between working in Indian country and, working kind of in that world, is that we don't really have that like one blanket statement we can just push out there. Each tribe has a different, a different relationship with everything. And definitely we're seeing a big movement. We did a project in Tulalip tribe, or with Tulalip tribe in Washington last year, where we did beaver relocation. It was pretty intense, live trapping and relocating them. And I think it's great. One of the things that we try to do with those types of trainings is we try to have the tribe be the teacher and then bring other tribes in. And that seems to be, we help to support the travel, because that almost always is a barrier, is being able to travel both ways. I know when I was working for my tribe, I can't imagine my boss supporting my travel to go somewhere else and not do the work on our own land. So, we're trying to take some of those barriers out to allow that cooperation and peer-to-peer learning to happen. And yeah, there's a lot going on around beaver relocation and beaver management, both sides of the coin, honestly.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, again, like we talked about earlier, managing land, fish, and wildlife is not easy, and could be on real close properties where you want to relocate a beaver that's flooding a road or whatever the case is to another area that you want to have maybe get dammed up a little bit. So very complex, and I definitely appreciate you doing all that you're doing. But tribes, I don't think you said Native American Fish and Wildlife Society is not just US too. I think you've got some tribes in Canada as well doing some
No,
work.
not really. Pretty much, we have in the past. I mean, there's several tribes that have international borders, and the political boundaries have split their nations, so they're doing work across there. We tend to pretty much focus in on the United States, mainly because, like I said, there's 574, 75 federally recognized tribes, and although we're working with about 350, we really feel like we need to do a better job of that and just be able to kind of really have that honed in before we expand. We have worked with First Nations in Canada in the past, and like I said, there's several tribes that are working across international borders, and we definitely want to continue those conversations. But our work is primarily in the 48, the lower 48 in Alaska.
Gotcha. And I know I joke with a lot of fish and wildlife folks that I know on the state side about, they've done a good job managing wildlife populations, but we also have to manage the human population, both hunters, non-hunters, target shooters, trappers, anglers. So, do you do some work with people on participation as well on reservation and stuff like that when it comes to hunting, fishing, trapping, and shooting?
Yeah, I mean, we have the NAFWS is world certified through the International Hunter Education Association for hunter safety, and so what we're doing and we've been working on and continue to work on is getting tribes certified underneath us, and then they can do their own hunting and fishing. Of course, it's the same accredited curriculum as the IHA has, but this allows them to add cultural or maybe even their hunting and fishing code and explain that. So trying to get that next generation and grow new hunters and anglers and trappers and all of those things, because unfortunately there's a disconnect even here on out here in rural America. There's not as much hunting and fishing as there were years ago. So that's one thing we're focused on. We also have a pretty robust education program where we host a national summer youth practicum. We've been doing that since, I believe, 91, and it brings Native youth, Alaska Native youth, and Native Americans from all over the nation to Colorado, around Denver. There we've been different places, but it brings them in, and then we have tribal professionals come and they learn everything from some field work. We've been partnering with the U.S. Forest Service for quite a few years with their electrofishing. They do tracking. They also go to CSU and start talking about college prep and kind of those deals. And then we have them do a mock tribal council where we give them a situation. We've done migration corridors for elk for a fake tribe that we make up, and we've done invasive species, and so then they kind of do this competitive process, and then we bring them to the national conference to present. So one of the things that we're really aware of is that Alaska Natives and American Indians are very underrepresented in the fish and wildlife profession, less than 1%. So we're really trying to grow that and gain interest in that, and also like tell the whole story. Like, you don't have to just be a math and science nerd to work in fish and wildlife. Like, we need accountants, we need mechanics, we need IT people and social media people and all of these different things. You can still work in this field and not just be a science nerd, I guess, which I think is kind of a misconception for a lot of students.
Yeah, well, speaking of science and misconceptions, Julie, there's a policy topic brewing right now in our community on we talk a lot about the North American model for fish and wildlife conservation, and that's been a huge success story for our country, and that's been a part of my portfolio since I've been at WMI. And my frustration with it is that people, I think, without knowing the history, they assume that Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot sat down and wrote this plan out for how we're going to manage wildlife for the next 100 years, and that's what we did. And here's the successes. And actually, it's a retrospective look at all the things we did wrong and right, and what things seem to work the best. But we're now talking about moving that forward for the next 50 or 100 years. Sort of a proactive look at what do we want our country to look like 50 years from now from a wildlife perspective. And I think one of the places that the tribes can plug in very heavily is there. I mean, y'all are tied so closely to the land, it just makes a logical connection. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on trying to, WMI is a facilitator of all this, trying to figure out how to get your arms around getting everybody to the table and developing a proactive, not say prescriptive plan, but a proactive plan for what we want things to look like going forward.
Yeah, I mean, we've had lots of conversations with TWS and WMI about the North American model, and there's been some efforts in Canada talking about indigenizing the North American model, and yeah, for sure, I would say the native voice is there. It's just portrayed as it's portrayed as a kind of plagiarized, I guess, as a non-native voice, like some of the concepts are indigenous concepts. Yeah. And so I think that it's there. Definitely would like to see tribes included more in those conversations and what that looks like. Um, I think, talking about some of the kind of the things that happened and righting wrongs and all of that, like the people of these lands were so tied to the ecosystem and the animals and everything that makes up that was actually weaponized as ways to kind of force their hand. I mean, here on the plains, we saw the decimation of bison herds, and basically it was, it's in history written down that congressionals and high up sergeants and all that were saying a dead buffalo is a dead Indian. And so it was kind of a way to really force tribes to kind of, go into the reservation life and force them when they couldn't feed their families and their food source was gone. So I think that definitely the North American model has been successful in some aspects, but also it's just been missing a large portion of the voice, and incorporating traditional ecological knowledge is something that would be beneficial, I believe, to the species and to, us all as a whole.
That sounds like something that I think you and John need to talk about, especially if John's going to be running that next phase of the North American model. That's great. Oh well, working on. But I know, again, I just like to again remind people it's not easy to manage land, fish, and wildlife. You had mentioned earlier, Julie, about all the a lot of species, and I think you had thrown in there like wild horses and stuff too. And I recall that being an issue as well. Is there any projects going on with that, or any? What's the latest news on that? Because they do, they're good in some spots, but they damage the habitat in
Yeah, I
others.
mean, I guess I would say probably the one that we're really watching and been most successful is on the Wind River Indian Reservation. They've removed thousands of feral horses from their landscape, and they're watching as cheatgrass, and all the natural prairie is starting to revitalize without the pressure of those feral horses. And they still have some, I believe, but I mean, they were talking about they're a huge landscape. They have a lot of wilderness area, and so when they started rounding, they were finding branded horses from several states away. So I think people's concept of wild horses is not necessarily this vision of horses majestically running through this ecosystem. It's more of a lot of times destruction if not managed properly. And so, and some tribes, they want those on their landscape, and that's completely up to them, and that's their right. But we are definitely interested in watching how this progresses and seeing the species come back, as the native species come back as that pressure is removed from the feral horses. So.
Yeah, I think that's an important point too. That in many cases, when we talk about invasive species, it's sort of a cascade effect. You get one species that comes in and it opens up a niche for another invasive, and you get horses damaging the landscape, and you get invasive grasses come in, and then but if you can pull the keystone invasive out of there, the natives will start recovering. But you got to take wherever the most pressure is.
Yeah. And it always amazes me how when you remove something like that, how the land will just restore itself quite a bit. And don't get me wrong, I'm a horse lover. Like grew up with cattle, riding horses, and my family's heavily involved with rodeo, but I've also seen the destruction that they can do to landscape. And I don't think the public really understand that, or they understand that that it also leads to stream degradation, and then your fisheries populations are impacted, and the water temperature is impacted. So there's a lot of negatives if just allowed to kind of, run unmanaged and kind of run rampant. And unfortunately, because tribes are severely underfunded, a lot of times this is a place where people will dump things like that because we don't have the resources or the enforcement to really adequately address those issues. But that's also a good example. Wind River is a good example of states and the state and the tribe working together. They did a lot of work together to get that done. And I got to give a shout out to Art Lawson and his team at Wind River Fish and Game. Like they're doing a tremendous amount of work, and I'm excited to see that landscape, rejuvenated without that pressure.
What state
Wyoming.
was that in? Wyoming. Okay. Well, so, it's for the folks listening, because we have hunters, anglers, trappers, shooters, general population listening, and if you're sitting in your high rise in a city or something like that, and you see news about, the beaver or the spotted owl, the barred owl, or the feral horses, it's don't get emotional. It's based on science. Like, we're trying, and not me, but Julie and John and all the wildlife managers out there are doing such an awesome job on managing land, fish, and wildlife conservation. Not easy, as I had mentioned a couple times. So thanks, Julie, for coming on. And unless there's something else you want to discuss, I don't know if you want to just let us know.
I was just going to say, honestly, like, it's the love for the land and the love for the ecosystem that really drives that. And unfortunately, sometimes there's so much outside pressure that you have to make decisions that others may not understand. And they may see it from looking on the outside that it's, just picking on one species or something, but it's more than that. And mostly it is a love of the land and the respect of the ecosystem that drives a lot of the decision making.
Right. Yeah. And it's, there's, again, controversial, but there's groups out there that make money on lawsuits to protect something that they know probably shouldn't be protected, but it's a moneymaker for them. So again, if you're listening, dig in deep and look for more information on how wildlife is managed and funded in America. And where can we find more information on Native American Fish and Wildlife Society?
We have a website, NAFWS, that's Native American Fish Wildlife Society.org. And there's lots of resources on that, on tribes. And we're also working on putting out kind of we're calling it a journal that'll showcase the work that's going on in Indian country by tribes, fish and wildlife. And we're hoping to have that done in a couple months, hopefully the first part of the year here. But it's called From the Field and Elevating Indigenous Voices. And also we are on pretty much every social media platform that you can find. We are on Facebook, a very active Facebook page, LinkedIn, Instagram, or the Gram, as the kids like to call it. And I think that's it. Yeah, all the socials. But yeah, and I mean, honestly, like, I encourage people to self-educate or to ask questions. I would, ask those questions. We want to have accurate portrayal and accurate information out there. And I do believe that the Native American Fish and Wildlife Society is a good resource for that. And we have, we manage probably the largest network of tribal fish and wildlife professionals. So if we can't give you a direct answer, we can probably connect you with someone that can answer it. But yeah, I would just say, do some self-education before you make assumptions and ask those questions, and don't be afraid to ask them.
Well, Julie, thank you for coming on. It's been a treat. I've been looking forward to getting you on for a while now. And Jim said we got to get her hooked up. So this has been very eye-opening. Appreciate everything you do on behalf of the tribes and on conservation in general across North America. So thanks for being with us for a bit. Hope we can have you back again. To our listeners, if you like this, subscribe to us, give us a thumbs up or like. That'll help you. It'll also let you know when our next episode is going to drop. And you can find out more information on either of our websites. So other than that, thank you for listening, and we'll see you again in the woods or on the water.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast. Please do us a favor and tell your buddies, friends, family, and others about what you've learned here today. If you like what you heard, come on back anytime and listen to another episode of the Connecting with Conservation podcast.